Now, where was the camp that they just took you to?
All we knew was in Virginia, and I'd been at a CCC camp,
Oh, okay.
the Army barracks. And when we got there, they told us, when you go through that office, they want the information, they want to know who you are and what you're, not just who you are, but you are not to tell them your name. You have a nickname. Yours is Bob. This other guy was Jack. And that's the name you give him, nothing else. So when I got up there and some non-com asked me, "What's your name?" I said, "Bob Clark." But they let me in anyway. And they gave us khakis. So we took off the civilian clothes, wearing khakis, and that's what we wore all the time. And there were a whole group of men, probably, I would guess 20 to 25, somewhere in that vicinity. And they ranged in age from my age to, at least one of them was a much, much older man. I would judge he was in his 40s, quite a bit older. And we did all this trying to learn how to run a radio, dit-dot. And we did cross the creek on a single rope. We did this physical training. The guy came from somewhere in China. He was showing us how to get in. He was a policeman from Shanghai. How to get into a room that had people with guns in it without getting killed. And then they taught us how to use a compass. And I'm from Kansas, and I'm used to seeing where John lives and Pete lives, no matter how far away. And this was woods, and we learned to use the compass. And one thing we did, the first test, was to go down here so far and verify where you're at, and then come back to the same place. Managed that pretty good, and there was a time put on it too. And then they got 6 of us together, and we were to be trucked out yonder at night. At night? It seems to me it was at night. I just can't believe that. And here's the points on the compass for you to go here, here, and back to camp. So and they put me in charge. So I've got 5 other guys, and we started out, and at first the woods had been cut, and so it was fairly easy to go. And then we run into some bad country, and you had to go around and still come back to your compass heading. And we got into a place where we had almost made a circle, I thought anyway. And it was pretty damn hard to figure out which way to go to get back on course. But there was something about the land that rung a bell with me, and I said, well, we're going to go that way. And the older man, the guy that was 40, he said, that's the wrong way. Don't go that way. You got to go here. And I was in charge, and I said, we're going here. And we did. And we came to a house with a dog barking, so we had to make a detour around that. And I'll be damned, we came right in beside the gate. This old guy never spoke to me afterwards. I thought that was pretty remarkable for a Kansas boy. And there was a man there who was obviously an Italian, city man, and they called him Angelo. Angie was his nickname. We figured he was Angelo. And the guy, Jack, was a Northeasterner. his vocabulary was from Boston. And he would say to Angie couldn't do anything physical. He couldn't climb the rope. He couldn't knit doll. He just couldn't do those things. Jack, and he'd hold us up when we were a group doing something. Jack would say, "Come on, Angelo, you guinea bastard." And we survived that and went back to Washington, D.C., back into uniform, went down to the office, and there was Jack, all dressed up. And he was a second-class stenographer. I think there's a name for it, not stenographer, but that's what he was. And we were sitting there talking about what we've been doing, and door opened, and here come a full lieutenant. Guess who? The little guinea bastard. And he walked up to Jack and said, "Hello, Jack, how are you?" And Jack stood up and said, "Just fine, Angie." Or sir, I think he called him sir. I saw Jack after I got back from China. Him and his wife come down from the New Boston area, and we went out to dinner with him one night. I didn't see him any time in China.
Oh, so everybody went their separate ways when they...
I don't think anybody from that training camp. Well, I can't take that back. Jack went with me part of the way. We were together part of the way.
When they sent you to the camp, did you have any idea what they were really training you for, or they just...
Had no idea. And they wouldn't tell us where we were going or who we were going to report to, because it was super secret. Admiral Miles was the American officer responsible for this action. And he had been almost killed 3 different times. Somebody tried to kill him 3 different times. So they wouldn't tell us anything that we might leak to the bad guys.
Where's your bride at this time, and what does she know?
She doesn't know anything except I'm in Washington, D.C. And after I got through the training, they told me I could have 7 days leave. So I called her and told her to meet me in Kansas, Colby, Kansas. I had a few days off, and we'd at least get to shake hands. And then she's on her own. So she's working in a bank, and she took time off, and they were perfectly willing to do that. Got a train ride back to Oakley, which is 30 miles away, and there's no transport between the 2 towns. And my brother was there, one of my brothers who was a soldier. And my mother and stepfather lived on a farm, and I only had gasoline for their working equipment. And he had an old model, I think it was from my family. My mother had that old model. No, what couldn't have been? See, they had an old Model A, and didn't have enough gas to get to Oakley and back. So my brother and I were walking downtown the day we were supposed to go. Betty's train was coming. And Joe saw Mr. Warner, who was on the rationing board, but we didn't know that. And he said, "Mr. Warner, it's a damn shame my brother can't."
You want me to stop down for a minute? Okay.
My dad, he was there in France, but he was on a train. He was in haul stuff around. Now, where are we?
you're trying to get to your bride who doesn't know where you've been carousing for a month or 2 or 3 or 4.
Well, this guy, Mr. Warner, was on the rationing board, and he said, "You just go get it." So he called somebody. So we got together, went over to Oakley and got her, and we stayed there in Kobe for a couple of days, and then we went out and spent a night with my mother and stepfather on the farm. They didn't have running water or electricity, so it's not the most pleasant place in the world to take your new bride. But we spent our week and that kind of stuff, and took her back to Oakley, and she took off, and I took off for Washington, D.C. And then shortly after that, very shortly, I was assigned in a group to go to China. And so they were going to put me on a train, Washington, D.C., Chicago. No. Anyway, we ended up down in Texas and then over to California. And I called Betty and told her if she could get down to California, Long Beach, California. I'll meet her when her bus comes in, and we'll go and stay with Mrs. Worsham. And Mrs. Worsham is a woman I met through Jack Carver. And I'd called her. She said, "That's fine." So I went on a troop train from Washington, D.C. The train was packed with soldiers and sailors. That's all. Got into Long Beach and got over to Mrs. Worsham's. And the next morning was when Betty was due. Well, she didn't come almost all day. And finally, I'm standing down where the bus will come in from Los Angeles into Long Beach, and there's a guy selling newspapers. He couldn't sell any. And finally he yelled one up and he says, "Errol Flynn raped Shirley Temple." He got a lot of attention, but he didn't sell any papers. These important things is what stand out in your memory, you know. Well, we got to go over to Mrs. Worsham and spend the night, and I took off. Next morning, I went aboard that troop transport and was gone. And
So
Betty...
You didn't see Betty?
Yeah, we spent the night at Mrs. Worsham's, yeah. And Mrs. Worsham said it was all right, she could stay until she had to go home. So she stayed a few days, and in the process, she met Jack Carver. His ship was in, and she got to see him. And I went to this troop transport. It was a captured Italian luxury liner converted to troop transport. Had a great big dance hall room, 30-foot ceiling in it, 20-foot ceiling, and packed with soldiers. And in order to make it a little more livable for us few sailors, they gave us jobs with the crew. I was assigned to one of the divisions. So me and a guy by the name of Jerry Yeoman, and I didn't like him at all the time in Washington, D.C. We fought about everything we could talk about, and he didn't like me either. And because he was a USNR, United States Navy Reserve. I was a sailor. So we'd fight about that. We were assigned to the same group, bed by bed, bunk by bunk, and worked together, and pretty soon we were playing pinochle or cribbage. We were good friends ever since. And on board ship was an officer by the name of Parkin, Major Parkin. He was a soldier, but he was in our group for some reason. and he fell in love with one of the Army nurses that was on board the ship. And they got married on that ship. The captain in charge of the ship was an ex-captain of the USS Wyoming, and he was a known drunk. So it was all right with him. He let him get married, and they took his room and spent the night, and that was it. The ship went into New Zealand. We had 4 days off in Wellington, New Zealand. The cabs were burning charcoal, taxi cabs. And then we went over to Australia, across the Tasmanian Straits. And we were all by ourselves, this troop ship. I don't know how many, 2,000 sailors, soldiers, I mean, plus the crew. And we spent 2 or 3 days in Australia. And in order for me to go ashore, or in New Zealand, in order to go ashore, I had to be a cop, MP. We call them MP?
MP, yeah.
Military police, yeah. I was a military police one night. And shore patrol, that's what the Navy called it, shore patrol. A friend of mine, he was shore patrol, but they put him in the jail, local jail in Wellington, and I was on the street. So when we got back to ship, we were telling each other what we had seen and done. Because New Zealand is a little bit different than America, no matter what, even if they did speak English. He said there was an island battle that the Marines had just finished, and they sent a bunch of them to New Zealand for rest and rehabilitation. And they brought one into the jail, drunker than a lord, put him in a cell, and after a while, this guy went back to see what the hell was going on, and he had taken off his coat and crapped on it. He said, I don't like New Zealand, I want to shit on the best part of it. So, anyway, we got to New Zealand, or to Australia. I got a day off, got one time to go ashore, and they wouldn't let me go at first because I hadn't had a haircut. This was approaching May, must have been late April. And we've been at sea since the 3rd of March. So I look pretty bad. And this Jack was aboard ship. That's how I got off. He come up and diverted the attention of the guy, shore patrol guy on the ship, and I got walked off. So we got to go ashore at least and have a meal. And then the ship went back to sea going for Bombay. One night in the middle of the night, the spotlights came on. And they were on about 30 seconds or less and off. And what had happened was the captain, there was a report of a light somewhere, and the captain says, well, turn on the spotlights. Here we are, troop ship with a 3-inch gun and 2,000 victims. But he's probably drunk. But the officer had the deck turn them off, right back off. And we finally got to Bombay. And our officers gave us their bars to wear on our shirt collars because we're dressed in khakis. We're not dressed like sailors. And the reason was that you can't go into a public place and get served as an enlisted man because the coolies, that was their area. There was a place that enlisted men could go, and it was a nice place. But the officers, English officers, didn't associate with English sailors or enlisted persons. So we had these, and we could go in an officer bar. We went in one, about 4 of us, And the waiter came and served us, and he was what the hell they call? He's really dressed for a servant man. And he took our order, and when he brought it back, he said, "When you men have finished your drink, please leave. You're not allowed here." But they didn't make any fuss over it. So we did. And we took a train. I don't know how much detail you want, but I saw, I'm in the cab, we went driving around Bombay, and I saw the public laundry place. And it was on a kind of a sloping place, a quarter of a block wide and half a block long, of tubs. Place to stand by, it looked like bathtubs, places to stand by it. And the public came down there and washed their clothes. And water was flowing through there. And right next to that place was there were some buildings with a series of rooms that had wood bar doors, just round bars in the doors. Asked the driver of the cab, "What the heck is that?" He said, "That's whorehouses." And they could come and go, but they had to have the light and air, I presume. But to leave, we went aboard train. And I was in the car with, I think there were 4 of us and 2 or 4 English or Indian, high-ranking Indian people. And they had a bathroom all itself and a shower, and the bunks made into beds, so we had a lot of comfort. We were going down the railroad, and we come to a village, and there's a depot, and on the depot was a bunch of circles, brown circles, all on the wall. What in the heck is that, anyway? None of us could figure it out, so when we stopped at the next depot, I hopped off and ran over there and looked. It's cow manure. They made it into patties and put it on there, and when it dried, it was ready for fire. And we got to Calcutta. We thought Bombay was poor, but Calcutta, you couldn't believe that. How desperate those people are. Sleeping on the street, women sleeping on the street, men straight, blood all around. And nobody cared. The English had feeding stations, and I've been by one where there was probably a half a block or more lined of people, and they squat. They're notorious squatters because they don't have anything to sit on. They squat, and the next person is squatted right between their knees. They're that close together. And they had a little basket. And the English would give them a dipper of rice and some other grain. That was what they got. It was better than starving to death, I guess. We ate in a big hotel, which was a foreign hotel. And they took good care of us, good food. There's some pictures of us. We stayed in a building, must be 3 stories high, and it had been made into dormitory type stories or rooms. We stayed in them, and you could go down and take a pedicab, rickshaw, to go to the hotel. I did that one time, and I couldn't handle that. So I would take a taxi. If I needed to, I'd take a taxi. But we got up on top, and there's some pictures of us showing off our guns. Submarines. Anyway, guns. And if you look at that picture, I've got hair. Obviously, I needed a haircut. they put us on board a train, took us out of the city for a ways, and then we got off the train and got on a side wheel boat in the Brahmaputra River. And it took us upstream. And now we had, probably were 20 of us, and 2 of them were Chinese doctors who had been trained in the United States and were coming home to China. Spoke English and were pretty reasonable type guys to be around. And we went off the side wheeler to another train, and then we had to stop and change trains because this was a normal train and the next one was narrow gauge rails. So they changed our rails, our train. And now we're in the coolie class. There's just a bench along the side and 2 benches in the middle. And the bathroom is a hole in the floor and the faucet about knee high. You turn it on and run water. And we were desperate for a cup of coffee. We stopped in a lumber area one time. And I went up to the engineer with my cup, that cup that service people have, and had him run me a cup full of hot water and run back and stirred coffee in it and drank that. And it's boiler compound in the damn engine. It just, my stomach just turned raw, but I didn't die. And we got to an Air Force base. I should remember that base. And that's where we're going to catch the plane to fly over the hump into Kunming. And while we were there, we had to wait, of course. While we were there, General Stilwell came through. And what he was doing was checking on the condition of his soldiers. And when he saw us sailors, he asked who we were, and we told him we were Navy. He just couldn't believe it. The hell are you doing out here in the wilderness? One day, I don't know how long we stayed there, but it must have been close to a week. One day a soldier came into our barracks and said, "Hey, any of you guys want to take an airplane ride? We've got a mission to go dump supplies to a camp over here, camp of Chinese over here in the jungle." Sure, I'll go. And we got up in the plane and they had taken the door off, back where the passengers come aboard. It was gone. And there were supplies in there packed in bags with parachutes. And the pilot flew over till he saw a signal on the ground, white, some kind of a signal that he recognized. And he told us to get ready, and he'd fly over there and go down low, and we'd push out whatever we had time for. And he'd make a big loop and come back and do it again. And about 4 loops, we unloaded the plane, and we walked right up to the damn door and pushed and was leaning on the door. Talk about nuts. And we're up in the Himalayas. They're really mountains. And one day they said, "Okay, time to go." There was 8 of us got aboard that airplane. I don't remember what kind it was. A transport, some kind of a C-25 or D-25 or something like that. And it took off, and the pilot said, "Can't go any higher." And I heard him radio back to base. We're over at so far away from the base, and at 1,700 feet, can't go any higher. And the other end, they just ranted and raved and told him to come back to base. So he did, and as we landed, started getting out of the plane, here come a Jeep with a warrant officer in charge, and he started cussing that pilot. He's considerably older than the pilot. God damn it, he said, we just overhauled that and I flew it myself. Arr, get back in. All you guys get back in. I'm going to take us up and show them. So we had to get back into that faulty plane, take another ride up in the mountains. He couldn't get higher than 1,700 feet either. So he looks a little chagrined. Anyway, they got us another plane. And when we got up to the level required to go over, I began to get sick at my stomach. I had just eaten before we went aboard, which was a mistake. But I told the radioman that I was beginning to get sick. What the heck? What should I do? And he said, take my oxygen. The crew had oxygen. So I used his oxygen for, 5 minutes maybe. Settled myself down and was all right. And I don't know how high we went, but it was pretty darn high. They all used oxygen. And we landed in Kunming. And Kunming was a big air base. Had a lot of soldiers, a lot of airmen. Put us in a barracks. And we hadn't been in the barracks a half an hour. Here come a soldier. He said, you guys come with me. I want to show you something. Because this is China now. It's not America. And we went out 100 yards away from the barracks, and there were 3, 4 Chinese laying on the ground dead, bullet holes in them. And the reason was they had been caught stealing tools from the air base. And they were caught and they were killed right then. So he was warning us, don't do anything stupid. And I was selected with 3 other sailors and 2 officers to take a convoy of 2, I believe it was 2 trucks of supplies overland to Chongqing. One of them was Lieutenant Colgrove and the other one was Lieutenant Jensen. And I don't remember the sailors' names. We had a driver and an interpreter to go with us. And we got out of town a little ways and the truck broke down. And the Chinese driver said, I got to go back to town. So the good one pulled the other one back to town. And officers did something. They gave us better trucks. And we had to spend the night in the barracks. So the 6 of us went into this barracks, beds in a row. And the Lieutenant Colgrove said, well, you know, we ought to clean our... That's me. We ought to clean our guns. We all had 45s. And Lieutenant Jensen had a 45 and a 38 revolver. So we, I don't know what you know about 45s, but you kick out the cartridge case, and you can cock it and lock it open, clean it, and pull the trigger, and it goes shut, and then you put the cartridge case in. We all did that. Click, 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 bang, 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 bang. And Jensen cleaned his 45, and then he cleaned his 38. Loaded her back up, pulled the trigger right down over the head of us. Shot right over the heads of us. And here come 2 Chinese soldiers on the dead run. And of course we couldn't talk to them. We didn't have any way of communicating. But we said we're all right. Hin hao, that's okay. And then the next day we got on the trucks and away we went. We got up in somewhere out of Kunming, quite a ways, probably 2 days, and there was a big waterfall in the river, beautiful waterfall. And we stopped at a Chinese place where there was food and used their tea and chopsticks and rice, and then our own rations that we had. We were carrying rations. And the interpreter, when Lieutenant Colgrove wanted to pay him, the interpreter said, don't pay him. Just give him the cans, the empty cans. That's worth more than money any time. These people don't know white people at all. And about that time, here come a woman, white woman. And she was a Swede, spoke English, and she was there as a health giver to people in that neighborhood. And we talked with her for a while until we knew something about her. And Lieutenant Colgrove said, well, what have we got that we can give you that'd be beneficial to you? He said, American toilet tissue. Because that's just like burlap bag. There it is. And we went on from there, and we ran into this was at the tail of a day. We wanted to go to the next town. But we were talking to some Chinese troops, and through our interpreter, of course, and the interpreter they said, don't go at night. Don't go when it's dark. Wait till tomorrow morning. Go back to this village. The reason is there's bandits out there, and they don't even stay out in the wilderness. They go back to their barracks. So we did that. Then we came to a city, and they had a hotel. Nice, clean, beds were clean, the food was foreign, and the cooks, the people who did that service, they were been trained in Europe. They weren't Chinese trained. So we enjoyed the heck out of that for one 24-hour period. And the four of us sailors went walking down the street, and there was fireworks. You buy fireworks. And we'd put them to a cigarette, and 1,000 Chinese following us, of course. And went upstairs to a cafe and had tea, and we'd throw fireworks off the balcony. Here come those some of them, two Chinese soldiers stopped that. We didn't speak Chinese, but we understood the language. But the funniest one was we got to a town at the border of a county, or like a state. And we had to be inspected by their guards, border guards. And they were nasty to us. And we got up in the trucks and started jerking things around, and Lieutenant Jansen got up there, and he was looking at the crowd. There's always a crowd. And there was a white-haired Chinese man with the nice whiskers. And they usually don't have whiskers. And he said, well, there's the most distinguished-looking man I've seen since I've been in China. And the man said, thank you. I used to live in Ohio. Those guards got out of the trucks and left us alone. And away we went. Jensen, when he drove, and we took turns driving the truck. The drivers didn't always do it. Went to a village, and he hated the Chinese. He'd move that truck over to the edge of the road to interfere with their traffic. And there was a coolie pulling a rickshaw. And he got so close to that guy and tipped over. The guy had to jump and tipped over the rickshaw through him. I hated that bastard from then on. But we finally got to Chongqing, the Yangtze River, just across the border, just across the river. And the two doctors, they were with us. That's where they were our interpreters. They had bags, and they weren't about to carry them. They wanted the coolies to carry them. So they called, and there were a bunch of coolies working there, dock workers type people, you know. I saw three of them. You know what a yo-yo pole is? They carry their load on their shoulder. Three of them had rigged up their three poles some way, carrying a 55-gallon drum of gasoline. And these two of them were big suckers. They were fairly tall and big, broad, heavy bodies. And when the doctors went this way, here they come. Two of them come over to do it because they wanted the money. And they got in a fight. And one of them was knocked that other guy just flying. And we asked how come they were so different from the other Chinese. They were from the north. They ate wheat, they didn't eat rice. And we took the sampan across the river, went up to the camp, and were there. This was the 3rd day of July, 1943. And one of the junior officers came to me, or maybe he was my officer, said, "Clark, you got to get a haircut tonight." I hadn't been there 24 hours. But the next morning was the 4th of July, and they had a big celebration that night. And the Chinese that came, one of them was a general. I sat about 2 places from him at the table, drink like a fish. Got drunk enough, and he just threw up under the table and went right back to drinking. Threw up. And I got to quit. I got to stop.
Chin.
We're-
Nice guy. What, when you headed off to China, they've done all this training and this top secret stuff. Now you buy this suit, you go out, you get trained. When did they tell you what their plan was for you, or what did you end up doing?
When I got to Chongqing, I was told that a bunch of these people were weathermen. They were going to make weather reports to the South Sea people that's fighting down there. And we were supposed to go with trained Chinese troops. I would have a 30-member group that I was training in the weapons, explosives, and how to. And we were supposed to go with them to damage something that the Japanese needed. I never did do that. I only know of one guy that I knew who did that. Apparently, there were some later ones who did. It came later. That was the point. I showed them TNT and plastic D, and, like clay, stuff like that.
And then they went off and...
Yeah, they just disappeared. I wouldn't know where they went. And I went from one camp. Well, I had to get from Chongqing out to my camp. And that took me through the airfield. You said something
Where
about
the Flying Tigers?
Flying Tigers were there. 2 airports, Hinyang and whatever the other one was. We went through them, and I was bombed. We were bombed. Each of the 4 days that we were in one of them. But they tended to bomb the town and then the airfield. And we'd go downriver. One time we went over into a soldier took me and another guy over into a temple. And the walls were 8-foot rock. So we were fine, but it took all day. So the next time when they sounded the alert, we went out to the edge of the barracks area. There was a hole in the ground, and we climbed in the hole. When they came back, that guy said, "Where in the hell did you guys go?" "Well, we went out there, there's a hole in the ground, we got in it." He said, "That hole in the ground's where they bombed their airfield. That was a bomb crater." You knotheads. But they bombed that place 4 times. That's where I saw them shoot down the plane. And then went on down almost to Canton on a train, some of us on trains, some of us on trucks. And they gathered together and started back to South Anhui province. And that was a pretty tough journey by truck because we're now in Japanese areas, so we didn't get much help. We got to Camp 1, which is my camp, and it was over a hill, about 5 miles or 5 lees, Chinese miles, I think. And there was a campground built in a temple, Buddhist temple. And there were rooms that the monks had used. And the temple was there, 1 story high. And they had built rooms for us besides that, and a place to eat. And it was a walled, had a 6-foot wall or better around it. And that's where we would get our company to train. They'd come and live right close to, there was a general in the vicinity. And for the first few months, we didn't have much to do. So it was boring as the dickens. And we bitched, I presume. And we set up a radio station there too. When I got there, they had one, but we put one with 3 towers up, so it would be effective. Anyway, Admiral Miles heard that we were in trouble, and my boss was now Marine Major Masters, and he had 2 gunnery sergeants that were responsible for the enlisted personnel. And Lieutenant Colgrove was there, and Jensen didn't come with us, thank God. No medical person. Had a corpsman named Art Deegan from Chicago. He was there. And we would get those people in and give them the weapons, show them how to use the explosives, and they'd just disappear. And one time I had a crew with a guy in there, he had a birthmark on his neck. It was at least as big as my hand. Stood out like a fan. And before I left, I was transferred down to Camp 6. Me and Major Masters didn't get along. And I saw that guy down there in another training group. And my suspicion was that he was communist. That was a communist group. And they were getting our weapons, going over there and coming over here and getting more. I don't know that, but I thought that. And the reason I got thrown, the reason I didn't get along with Masters, we got a bunch of new people in, and they built us a new dining area building. And we all ate in the same building, officers and men. And 4 of the Marines that came in that group, there's a bunch of 30 of us, or probably more, were singers. They sang duet, a quartet. And one of the officers got a radio report that he was a new father. So these guys sang him a little ditty, cute little ditty. He just sat there and didn't like it at all. So they sang him another, and it wasn't quite as cute. And the senior officer in there said to the gunnery sergeant, "Tell those guys to leave the dining hall." So he come over, gunnery sergeant, Gunny, we called him. Way Holland was his name. Way Holland. He come over and says, "You guys, you're getting in trouble. You better get out of here." So they got out. I got out too. I got up and left. And when Masters heard that, it pissed him off. And he was going to give us a general court-martial, all of us, all 5 of us. And Gunnery Sergeant talked him out of that. You want to take him to captain's mast, or go do that, but don't do something stupid. So he held captain's mast and gave us 5 days bread and water. And in order to do it, they have to be alone. So we kicked officers out of their quarters, and we got to be in their quarters. And go without food? No way. The Chinese cook, she'd get the houseboy, take this up to those guys. No, we always got to eat. Every night we had something to eat. 4 Masters.
The original Chinese takeout.
That's right. Now, you better ask me what you...
60 years later, now are gonna be generations of people that you and I never meet. I wasn't there, so. It's a two-part question. One, 6 years later, it looks like, at times when you talk about it, it could have been yesterday. And the second part to that question that goes with that is, because it was such a powerful part of your life, at least from what I see, is there a message that you feel needs to be left with today's generation and generations to come that from World War II and all that you saw?
Well, that's a tough one. You know, I never thought about that business, or darn little, for years. I was busy making a living. So I didn't pay attention to that. I didn't even join the VFW for a long time. But to compound the question, I just got this stuff from my uncle. His generation did it. My generation did it. Why? Each generation. Then there's Korea and Vietnam. There's something that we're not being fair about. America is not. Why don't we be friends with Cuba instead of China? Communists? What the hell difference does it make? South America. We treat them like scum. Always have. Why? I think we're making a mistake by giving the Jews the $3 billion a year. And I know they need it. But they're doing things that is harmful to their area. And they should quit. They should have to quit. And we don't want to go and bomb them. We don't want to do that. I don't know about the Afghanistans. That just wipes me out. Because it has the religion involved, and it doesn't make any sense that I believe in God and treat somebody like that. It doesn't make any sense. So if we learned anything, we should learn good behavior to other men. Not be so selfish. It doesn't help a guy to be a billionaire if the next thing he does is to want to be a two-billionaire. What the hell good does that do? None. Share that with Cuba, South America. And then we're trying. Our attitude with the Mexicans has changed dramatically where I live. And I think that's the way to go.
Is it, and I know a lot of this has been real tough for you, is when you close your eyes sometimes and somebody's been talking to you a lot about World War II, I mean, is it something that still just lives on in your head and your heart? Or what is war in 60 years later to a person?
I did not suffer, so it makes it a little difficult for me to say how I really feel, how I should feel. If you imagine some of the things that happened to these people that did suffer, it'd be pretty hard for them to want to be nice to the guy that's killing them, even 2 generations later, and some of them do. Some people from Pearl Harbor welcome the Japanese. We had a Japanese lady friend, Betty did, all the time we were in Taiwan. They're just people, and they're as good as I am. So, yeah, sometimes emotions get me. I was in Washington D.C. when Roosevelt died. I was a guard on the street, in fact. And those things are difficult, very difficult for me. Maybe not for some other people, of course. But I don't know what else I can tell you.
Was Betty the silver lining to World War II for you?
Well, she was the gold lining. Yeah, kept me out of a lot of trouble.
For 60 years.
She's kind. So I learned a lot from her.
I'll stop there. I'm going to get you on mic here.